The Silver Pact, Part 1. The Man Who Looked at the Ground. Elias Morrow spat dust and cursed the mule for the third time that morning. The animal, a stubborn beast with resigned eyes, simply stopped in the middle of nowhere and refused to take another step. There was no shade, no water, nothing but desert and sky and the heat that rose from the ground in visible waves. "Move, you damn thing!" He pulled the reins without conviction. The mule looked at him. The look said, "Kill me then. At least I'll rest." Elias, he took off his hat, wiped his sweaty shirt sleeve across his forehead, and scanned the horizon. 6 months ago, he was a respectable man in Ohio. He had a small farm, a wife he still loved after 15 years, 3 living children, and 1 in the womb. He also had debts, but that was normal. What wasn't normal was the bank catching fire with all the deeds inside. What wasn't normal was the drought that lasted 2 summers. What wasn't normal was him being here in Arizona territory, following stories of silver that were probably as real as mermaids. Silver, he muttered with disgust. The mule didn't answer. He was 2 weeks away from the last town, with supplies for 3 more and 0 results. The Apaches he encountered along the way weren't hostile. They just watched him from a distance, motionless, as if waiting for him to disappear on his own. One of them, an old man with scars on his face, even approached close enough to be heard. "The mountain sleeps. Don't wake it." Elias, who was a practical and baptized man, replied, "I'm after ore, not spirits." The old Apache spat on the ground, a gesture Elias knew well, the same one farmers in Ohio made when talking about politicians, and left. Now, with the mule balking and the sun at its peak, Elias began to think that maybe the old man was right. Maybe the mountain should sleep. That was when the mule lifted its head. Its ears pointed northeast. The animal, not from fatigue, but from something that seemed like attention. Elias followed the mule's gaze. On the horizon, where before there was only desert, there was now a mist, not a dust cloud. It wasn't windy enough for that. It was a white, dense fog, rising from a valley he hadn't noticed before, as if the ground were exhaling. The mule took a step, then another. This time, it was pulling him. All right, he said and followed. Part 2, the valley. The valley was green. That was the first thing Elias noticed, and the last thing he could explain. Green in a desert was like snow and hail, possible only if something was very wrong. There were trees, many of them, and a stream that ran between moss-covered rocks. The mist rose from the ground in thin threads, like steam from a kettle, but the temperature was mild, almost cold. "There's water here," he said out loud, as if he needed to hear his own voice to believe it. The mule was already drinking from the stream. Elias crouched to fill his canteen. The water was icy, almost painful on his teeth. He drank until his belly ached. That was when he heard the sound. A creak, low, rhythmic, like a wagon wheel needing grease. But there was no wagon. There was nothing but trees and mist and the sound coming from somewhere beneath his feet. He looked at the ground. The stream ran over stones, but between the stones there was an opening, small, dark, like the mouth of a dry well. The sound came from there. "Anyone there?" he called, expecting no answer. The sound stopped. Elias stood still, canteen in hand, breath held. The mule kept drinking, indifferent. After a minute, he decided he had imagined it. Fatigue, thirst, the sun, things played tricks on a man's head. He set up camp right there, by the stream. The next morning, he woke with his face wet from dew and the certainty that he was not alone. Part 3, the men from below. They emerged from the mist at noon. 3 men, dirty, bearded, with eyes that seemed to reflect light wrong, like cat's eyes, Elias thought, but didn't say. They carried pickaxes and pans, and on their backs, heavy packs. "Morrow?" the oldest asked. He had an Irish accent and a scar that ran from ear to chin. "Yes, Elias Morrow." "Your name's already on the mountain," the man said, and laughed without humor. "We heard. The Apaches are talking. Said you came looking for silver." "I came." "Find any?" Elias hesitated. Something about those men bothered him. Besides the eyes, there was the way they moved, very slowly, very carefully, as if the ground might break. "Not yet," he answered. The Irishman, Callahan, he introduced himself later, pointed at the ground with his chin. "You're standing on it. The whole valley is silver, but it's not the silver we came for." "What did you come for?" Callahan looked at the other two. They exchanged a glance Elias couldn't interpret. "We work for a man," Callahan said, lowering his voice. "He bought the mining rights to this area before he died. Now we work for the heirs. But there's something." "What something?" "The well, where you drank yesterday. We dug it. We went down. 7 men went in. Only 3 came back. Us 3. Elias felt a chill down his spine. "What happened to the others?" Callahan opened his mouth to answer, but one of the others, a thin man with sunken eyes, who hadn't said a word until then, touched the Irishman's arm. "Don't tell him," the thin man said. His voice was a whisper, as if he'd forgotten how to speak aloud. "He'll go down anyway. Everyone goes down. Elias didn't go down, not that day, but he stayed." Part 4. The Fever. That night, the thin man, Jedediah, began to rave. It wasn't a common fever. He sweated cold, his eyes open but empty, and repeated one phrase without stopping. "It's dark down there, but they're lighting candles. They're waiting for us to come back." Callahan and the third man, Silas, a tall, quiet black man who must have been a slave before the war, didn't sleep. They sat around the fire, watching Jedediah, waiting. "He saw things down there," Callahan said low. "We all saw, but he stayed longer. He kept looking." "What did you see?" Elias asked. Callahan took a long time to answer. When he did, he didn't look at Elias. He looked at the fire. People. Lots of people. Standing in the dark, staring at the wall. When we got close, they turned. They didn't have faces, just holes. But we knew they were smiling. Silas spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, calm, like someone who had seen worse. "You ever seen an old mine, Mr. Morrow? The ones the Spanish dug 200 years ago? We found one. Down there. Looks like they dug until they found something and stopped. Filled the hole with stone and vanished." "What something?" "The thing we saw." Jedediah died at dawn. Not from fever. He simply stopped breathing, eyes still open, mouth in a smile that wasn't his. They buried him right there by the stream. Callahan wanted to pray, but forgot the words. Silas stood silent, looking at the grave. Elias thought of his wife, back in Ohio, of the child who would be born without him if he died here. "I'm leaving," he announced. Callahan and Silas exchanged glances. "You can try," Callahan said. Elias tried. Part 5. The Mist Won't Let You. He walked for 3 days. 3 days in a straight line, with the mule and his supplies, away from the valley, away from the mist. On the 3rd day, the mist appeared ahead of him, not behind, ahead, as if he had walked in a circle, as if the valley were bigger on the inside than on the outside. He went back. Callahan and Silas were in the same place, sitting on the same log, as if they hadn't moved. "It happens," Callahan said. "We tried too." "What is this?" Elias asked, and for the first time in years, his voice trembled. "What place is this?" "It's the place where the man who bought the mine wanted to dig," Silas answered. "He was smart, knew there was silver, but he found out there was more, and when he found out, it was too late." "Who was he?" "A man named Cross." The name meant nothing to Elias, not at that moment. "He went down," Silas continued, "went down with 20 men. Only he came back. And when he came back, he wasn't himself anymore. Turned pale, eyes sunken, and started walking only at night. bought strange things. Shadows, they said. He bought people's shadows. Where is he now? Left, but he left the door open. What door? Callahan pointed at the ground. The mine, the hole we dug. Down there, there's a stone wall. The Spanish made it. Behind the stone, there's something. We heard it, and whoever hears it stays. Not everyone can leave. Elias looked at the mule. The mule looked back with its resigned eyes. There was no judgment there, only acceptance. Can it be closed? He asked. Callahan shook his head. No, but you can make a deal. A deal with who? With what's behind the wall. Part 6, The Pact. They went down the next morning. The mine entrance was a black hole in the middle of the green, like an open mouth. The smell that came out was of wet earth and something else, something sweet, like rotting flowers. Callahan carried a lantern. Silas carried a Bible he never opened. Elias carried only his mother's crucifix, small, silver, warm in his pocket. They went down deep, deeper than Elias thought possible. The tunnel spiraled downward, as if dug by a creature that didn't care about right angles. The walls glittered in some places, silver, yes, but also something dark, like obsidian, that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. At the bottom, they found the wall. It was stone, yes, but it didn't look natural. It was smooth, polished, as if hands had spent centuries smoothing its surface. And behind it, knocking, slow, rhythmic, like an enormous heart. They're listening to us, Callahan whispered. Silas placed his hand on the wall, closed his eyes. They're waiting, he said, waiting for someone to offer something better than blood. What kind of thing? Elias asked. Silas opened his eyes. They were shining in the dark. A promise. Elias understood, not through intelligence, but through instinct, the same instinct that makes an animal play dead when it knows it cannot flee. He took the crucifix from his pocket. He knelt. He placed the cross on the ground at the foot of the wall. I, Elias Morrow, he said, and his voice echoed as if many repeated behind him, offer this in exchange. My faith, my memory of home, my mother's name, everything that ties me to the world above. In return, let us go up, let us live, and let us take a little of the silver, just a little, for my family to start over. The knocking stopped. The silence was worse. After a time that might have been a minute or an hour, the wall yielded. It didn't open, didn't crack. It yielded, as if made of mist, and for an instant Elias saw what was behind it. He never described it to anyone, but that night, when they climbed up, his hair was white. Callahan and Silas climbed with him. They were alive, all three. But behind them, something climbed too. It wasn't physical, it was a permission, an agreement, a veil that, before thick, was now thin as tissue paper. Part 7, The Eyes. On the surface, the sun blinded him. Elias staggered, fell to his knees, vomited dirt. When he managed to stand, he looked at Callahan and Silas. Their eyes were different. They reflected light like cat's eyes. As he would later discover, his did too. What did we do? He asked. Callahan didn't answer. He just looked at the valley, at the mist rising thicker now, at the trees that seemed darker. We did what we had to, he said finally. Now we live here. We found a town. We take the silver, and we never, ever go down there again. And if we do? Callahan smiled. It wasn't a good smile. Then we pay. Part 8, The Town. Morrow was founded in the spring of 1882. The families came, Elias's wife, his children, other settlers drawn by the stories of silver. The mine produced like no other. In 3 years, the town had a church, a school, a hotel, a saloon. It also had a mist that never fully dissipated, and inhabitants who learned not to comment on the eyes that shone in the dark. Elias Morrow was mayor for 12 years. He built a large house, raised his children, watched the town grow. He never again spoke of what he saw behind the wall, but every night before sleeping, he placed his hand on his chest where the crucifix used to be and felt an emptiness that nothing filled. His wife Martha noticed that he sometimes woke in the middle of the night and stood looking at the window, at the mist, as if waiting for someone. "Who are you waiting for?" she asked once. He took a long time to answer. "Them," he said finally. "They're always waiting for us to come back." Martha never asked again. Part 9. The Echo. In 1893, the cholera epidemic killed 23 people in Morrow. They buried them on the hilltop far from the mine, but the next morning the graves were empty. Elias knew before anyone else. He woke to footsteps in the hallway, many footsteps, dragging, like those of people who had learned to walk again after a long time still. He got up, went to the window. They were walking down Main Street, 23 figures in burial clothes, moving slowly toward the mine. They didn't look at him. They didn't need to. He knew where they were going, and he knew that one day he would go too. Part 10. The Pact Remains. Elias Morrow died in 1901 of pneumonia. His body was buried in the new cemetery, far from the mine, with a simple headstone. "Here lies a man who did what he had to." That night, the mist descended on the town thicker than ever. And the next day, when the gravedigger went to check the grave, it was empty. No one commented. The old residents just exchanged glances and went about their lives. Some things didn't need to be said. Elias Morrow hadn't broken the pact. He had simply fulfilled his part. Now he lived in the mine with the others, waiting, always waiting. The end.